She had barely finished unpacking when the trouble began. Whispers from neighbors. Phones lifted behind curtains. Then screeching tires and flashing lights. A woman she had never met stood proudly beside the officers, arms crossed like she had just saved the neighborhood. Her crime? Existing in the wrong skin, in the wrong zip code. But what that woman didn't know was who she was accusing, because this wasn't just any homeowner. And when her truth finally came out, it didn't just silence the Karen. It flipped the entire street on its head. So ask yourself, what happens when prejudice picks the wrong target? Her name was Alyssa Carter, a decorated Air Force veteran who had spent over a decade serving her country overseas. After years of deployments, dusty bases, and sleepless nights under foreign skies, she was finally ready for peace. She dreamed of quiet mornings, friendly neighbors, and a fresh start where she could live. Not as a soldier, but simply as herself. So when she bought her first home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, she treated it like her greatest victory. She repainted the porch, planted roses by the mailbox, and waved at every passerby with a hopeful smile. She wasn't looking for trouble, only belonging. At first, everything seemed normal. A few polite nods, curious glances, the usual small-town silence. But slowly, the air shifted. Conversations stopped when she walked by. Neighbors whispered within arm's reach, pretending not to stare. Some turned their backs altogether. Still, Alyssa brushed it off. She had faced worse in uniform. Civilians' discomfort was nothing compared to chaos in the desert. She told herself it would pass, they just needed time. But someone wasn't waiting. Someone had already decided she didn't belong. Not because of who she was, but because of what she looked like. To them, she wasn't a veteran, a homeowner, or a neighbor. She was a threat. And while Alyssa spent her days settling into her dream home, someone else was quietly preparing to tear it away. At first, the signs were subtle. A mailbox left open. Trash scattered across her lawn while every other yard remained spotless. Letters removed and tossed beside the curb. Alyssa dismissed it as coincidence, until coincidence began repeating itself every single morning. Then came the notices. First, a paper taped to her door. Yard must meet HOA standards. Grass too long. Her grass was cut shorter than most on the street. The next week, unauthorized vehicle in driveway. Reported. It was her registered SUV, parked in her own space. Alyssa tried reaching out politely, asking for clarification. No one responded. Instead, the silent harassment grew louder. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks when she walked outside. They never spoke to her, only about her, in hushed tones just loud enough to hear. She heard words like, suspicious and watch her. One woman clutched her child's arm whenever Alyssa passed, as if proximity alone was danger. Still, Alyssa chose restraint. She had taken oaths, faced enemies, endured war zones. A neighborhood couldn't break her, but she had no idea someone was determined to try. One morning, as she watered her roses, a woman marched across the street. Tight ponytail, arms folded, lips pursed like she was holding back fire. You need to leave, the woman snapped without introduction. This is a private neighborhood. Alyssa blinked. Ma'am, I own this house. The woman scoffed. We'll see about that. She walked away before Alyssa could respond. Phone already to her ear. Alyssa didn't think much of it. She assumed it was another idle threat. Another whisper in a line of many. Until the sirens came. Not one. 3. Flashing lights reflected across every porch as neighbors emerged one by one. Phones raised like spectators awaiting a show. The same woman who confronted her stood proudly beside the patrol cars, pointing toward Alyssa as if she had caught a criminal in the act. Officers stepped out cautiously, hands near their holsters. Ma'am, one called out, we received reports of a break-in at this property. We need you to step away from the residence. A break-in? At her own home. Alyssa steadied her breath. She had been trained for confrontation, but never expected it here, in front of her roses under her own flagpole. She raised her hands slowly, not out of guilt, but of wisdom. My name is Alyssa Carter. she said firmly. This is my home. I can show you proof of ownership. But the officer didn't lower his stance. Neither did the bystanders. Phones pointed. Eyes narrowed. Judgment already passed. And then the Karen stepped forward with a smirk. Ask her what she's really hiding. Alyssa felt her pulse thundering in her ears. She knew she could defuse this. She also knew she could end it. The only question was, which version of herself would they meet next? For a moment, time stood still. Alyssa's hands were raised, calm but unshaken. The officers watched her every movement as if a wrong breath could ignite chaos. Behind them, the woman who called them, arms folded, chin lifted high, wore a smile of victory. She's resisting, the woman shouted, though Alyssa stood perfectly still. One of the officers stepped forward, hand hovering near his cuffs. Ma'am, he said sharply, we're going to need to verify your identity. Alyssa nodded slowly. She had nothing to hide, but everything to lose if she made the wrong move. She reached, deliberately, visibly, into her back pocket. Gasps erupted. Phones zoomed in. Whispers rippled through the crowd. What was she reaching for? Her wallet. She opened it without a word. And then, she pulled out a card worn from years of use, edges frayed slightly, but still gleaming with pride. Her military ID. She held it up not as a plea, but as a declaration. The officer nearest her froze. His eyes widened. His posture changed. Slowly, he straightened, not as an enforcer, but as a man who had just realized he was standing before someone who had served more honorably than anyone on that street had likely ever imagined. He stepped back. Then he saluted. Silence swallowed the neighborhood. The Karen's smirk vanished. Her arms dropped to her sides. She stumbled a step back as if struck by invisible force. She's military? Someone whispered behind a phone screen. Alyssa didn't speak. She didn't need to. The officer turned toward the woman who made the call. Ma'am, he said firmly, filing a false report is a serious offense. We'll need a statement from you. The crowd shifted. Some lowered their phones. Some didn't. But one thing was clear. The hunter had become the exposed. And in that single moment, the neighborhood finally saw her not as a threat, but as a soldier standing her ground. The officers eventually cleared the scene, leaving behind a street full of silence. No one celebrated. No one spoke. For the first time since she arrived, Alyssa wasn't being watched out of suspicion but out of shame. Neighbors who once stared now struggled to meet her eyes. Some retreated indoors. Others lingered, unsure whether to apologize or pretend nothing happened. Alyssa didn't gloat. She didn't demand an apology. She simply lowered her hand, slipped her ID back into her pocket, and turned toward her door, dignified as ever. But something had changed, not just for her, for them. Because in that moment, the neighborhood was forced to face an uncomfortable truth. They hadn't feared her because she was dangerous. They feared her because she didn't fit their image of who belonged. It took a uniform, proof of service, proof of worth, for them to reconsider her humanity. And that's the problem. Respect shouldn't have to be earned through sacrifice. Safety shouldn't depend on a badge. Dignity shouldn't be conditional. Alyssa didn't move there to be a hero. She moved there to live in peace. But once again, she had been made to fight, this time not for her country, but for the simple right to exist on her own property without suspicion. And while she won that battle, the war isn't over, because her story isn't just hers. It's shared by countless others who don't get the chance to pull out an ID, or be heard, or be believed. So the question is, how many more Alyssas will it take before we stop judging by fear and start recognizing each other by truth? The officers eventually cleared the scene, leaving behind more than flashing lights and unanswered stares. They left behind a neighborhood forced to confront itself. No one spoke. No one laughed. Those who once whispered now stood in silence, not from fear of Alyssa, but from the weight of their own assumptions. Alyssa didn't seek validation. She didn't demand apologies. She simply turned and walked back into her home. Not in defeat, but in quiet victory. Because she had proven something without raising her voice. She didn't need their approval to exist. But the real question isn't what happened to her that afternoon. It's what we do with her story now. Because her experience isn't rare. It's reality for countless others who never get the chance to prove themselves, who don't have a uniform to justify their presence, who are judged first and understood never. And if stories like this make you feel something, anger, sadness, hope, don't just feel it. Use it. Backhand index pointing right, share this story. Speak up when others stay silent. And if you believe more people need to hear the truth, hit like, drop a comment and subscribe. Not for me, but for every voice still being silenced. Because change doesn't start with laws, it starts with awareness. And awareness starts with you. So ask yourself, will this just be another story you watched? Or the one that finally pushed you to take a stand?